Welcome to the Exam Room Live, brought to you by the Physicians Committee. Hi, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll, and this is the healthiest half hour anywhere online today. Appreciate you joining us right here on Facebook and on YouTube. Gonna switch things up a little bit on the program today. Gonna be talking about controversial new experiments being conducted by SpaceX and Tesla founder Elon Musk. Experiments that involve implanting computer chips into the brains of pigs. And for that, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Ann Lamb. Dr. Lamb, appreciate you being here. We're going to get into the details and learn more about other methods that can be used that are kinder to animals and potentially even more effective in creating medical breakthroughs for humans. So Dr. Lamb, looking forward to speaking with you. Also on the show today, Dr. Neal Barnard will be here to talk about some of the things that we've been doing here at the Physicians Committee to end these types of animal experiments. Dr. Barnard, I know that we have made some great progress already.
You bet, Chuck.
And we'll be taking a look at a new study as well on the coronavirus and the potential for it to spread through the seafood that is being sold in your local supermarket. We'll be taking your questions as well as we open up the doctor's mailbag. Man, we got a full show on tap. So go ahead and drop your question for Dr. Barnard in the comment section now, or you can send them to us on Twitter or Instagram using the hashtag ExamRoomLive. But before we go any further, as always, let's get caught up on what's happening in the world. Here are your health headlines for Wednesday, September 16th, 2020. Global health experts are warning that life may not return to normal until the year 2022. The World Health Organization's chief science officer, the latest to issue the prediction, telling reporters that the most realistic timeline for a coronavirus vaccine would be the middle of 2021, and the virus wouldn't immediately vanish once vaccines do hit the market. She says social distancing and masking will need to continue well into the following year. The U.S., meanwhile, still averaging close to nearly 40,000 new cases every day. In other news, eating more whole grains could play a key role in lowering your blood pressure. In a study of more than 3,100 adults in Chile, researchers say those who ate the most whole grains had a 39% lower risk of having hypertension compared to those who ate little or none at all. Researchers say it's possible this is due to the anti-inflammatory effects found in the fiber of whole grain foods. Studies show that having high blood pressure can significantly increase a person's chances of having a heart attack or a stroke. Here in the U.S., nearly half of all adults do, in fact, have high blood pressure. And finally, how cute is that face? TV watchers in Israel saw something they weren't expecting recently: the country's first pro-vegan ad. The 60-second spot aired during the season finale of the wildly popular show Survivor Israel, reaching an estimated 35% of the entire country. The commercial from the organization Vegan Friendly shows a couple entering a supermarket, heading to the butcher, and then asking for meat that is, quote, extra fresh. They are then handed a baby lamb. And according to Plant-Based News, the commercial ends with the simple message: make the connection. And that goes to the heart of what it is that we will be discussing here on the Exam Room Live today. SpaceX and Tesla CEO Elon Musk made headlines recently for what he called the Three Little Pigs demo. In that, he showed a pig who had a coin-sized computer chip inserted into their brain and gave the promise that this device may lead to a cure for human diseases. But my next guess is that there is a more humane way to do this, one that does not involve harming or endangering animals. Please welcome Dr. Ann Lamb to the Exam Room Live.
Hi, great to be
Dr.
here.
Lamb, thank you so much for joining us. Can you talk to us a little bit about these experiments that are being carried out right now?
Right. So the fact is, unfortunately, because it's a commercial entity, there's a lot of this is really under wraps. Everything is hidden. We only get to see what Musk wants us to see. But what we do know is that these experiments involve implanting 1,000 or more electrodes into an animal's brain in the shape of a chip. And the idea here is that this should be able to do all sorts of magical things like cure disease and help us connect better to technology. What possibly could go wrong, right? But the problem is that we know that he's done this in a number of animals, not just the pigs. This includes rats, monkeys, and the pigs. So it's hiding. There's a sort of veneer of cleanliness that he's showing that really that it's humane washing, that actually there's a lot of horrific animal experimentation that's going on.
And am I correct in assuming that the animals who are being used in these experiments did not have these conditions to begin with?
No, as far as we know, and again, I have to iterate, we know very little. There is one publication that wasn't even scientifically peer reviewed, as far as we can tell, that these are functional animals, and they were implanted with these devices, various versions of these devices, to see how they would work. So again, this idea that our animals are there for us to use is just completely regressive science.
Absolutely. It seems barbaric to be doing this. Can we talk specifically about some of the conditions that they believe that they are going to be improving or treating with these? Like, what are they trying to find specifically to improve upon?
Right. So Musk has been transparent about this, at least. His long range goal is to commercialize it. You're talking about a lot of commercial wealth, a lot of for profit interests that are involved here. But in terms of the near term, the idea is that they will help people who are suffering from paraplegia, possibly from pain. And again, it sounds great, right? Where um, what if we could just take away your pain by implanting a device? But of course, we know very well we're undergoing one of the worst crises with the opioid crisis, where it's exactly this. It was this shiny promise of being able to take away people's pain, and not realizing just the huge cascade of consequences that would leave us.
And here's kind of my big question is that when it comes to the efficiency of these animal tests, how well does that translate then to, human relevant research? I'm under the impression that more often than not, it's a swing and a miss.
Absolutely, and at least what we have seen, what's been released to the public in the press, in his demos, nothing that he's shown where you put electrodes, where you're putting electrodes in the brain, where you can record from the brain activity. This is nothing new. This is being marketed as something that is new, but it is not. And so it's not only sort of it's a misleading to say that this is some sort of huge innovative breakthrough, but it's also exposing the the huge gaps in our ability to actually take something from recording and seeing some neural activity to actually being able to make some effective change.
Let's talk about the more human relevant methods out there, the more humane ones that don't involve using animals in these lab tests. So, is there a way to kind of replicate exactly what it is that they're trying to do here with these pigs without ever involving an animal?
Mhm. So what's really important is to understand we do preclinical, non-clinical research because we want to understand how things function. We want to understand the disease. We want to understand how that mechanism, what is that equation that causes something to become sick, and how do we stop that? And when we use humane non-animal methods, we can actually hone in to some of those components of what I've just mentioned better. And by that I mean we can look using what we called in vitro techniques. So perhaps something within cell culture, something like we can actually record maybe more directly to brain cells that have been cultured. We can look at changes with genetics and see perhaps how things may be adversely damaged because of certain types of experimental conditions, so some types of potential therapies. use. So there are those things as well. And then there's even the engineering side of things, because we're talking about here a potential medical device where we can look at, we can create apparatus that actually, with the known properties of our apparatus, we can measure the cause and effect more effectively of any sort of perhaps adverse effect there. And then eventually, the most important thing is for us to figure out how to think safely. What are the limits of this type of technology that need to be done? What are the ethical issues that are not being considered? What are the legal implications? What are the social implications? And then only then should we be thinking about, how do we then move safely to, say, clinical trials, which
And
is
let's
the gold standard.
let's talk about a little bit more about some of these alternative methods that you were just referencing. There are two words that have been used on this show frequently that have kind of become buzzy, at least as I see it. That would be insert something on a chip. That would be one of the phrases. So maybe in this case, brain on a chip. And then the other one is dish. I know that there's something out there called Alzheimer's in a dish, where they're able to kind of replicate and conduct experiments again without ever bringing animals into the equation. Is that kind of what you were describing just then?
Not exactly, though. Certainly, the tissues on the chip, the where we can actually create these community of cells. Sometimes they're different types of brain cells, or it can be something like a lung on a chip or something like that. Those are powerful tools, and yet they also come with their own host of problems. But there is a potential for us to control where we set our limits. For example, so we may be thinking about, for example, we want to see how these electrodes work in communicating with a brain cell. Well, we can do that. We may want to see how well Musk very, very proudly said that he was able to avoid vessels. Well, you could see how these cells, how the surgical technique could avoid in a cluster of cells, because where those cells are. But we have to be careful with our technology as well, that we uphold and maintain those same levels of ethical standards, and really think about sort of the future implications of these things. But absolutely, I think that technology like that are going to be part of a concert of techniques that we can use to study this type of technology.
And I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the quality of life of these animals who are used in these experiments. So let's stick specifically to pigs. Even though not a whole lot is known about these experiments that are being conducted right now, I think that based off of the track record of previous animal experiments, we can get a pretty good idea about what their quality of life is like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the fact is that we now know that he has built his own animal facility. Previously, he had been working with UC Davis, where I think the majority of the animal experiments were being done, but we are investigating that right now. And the fact is that pigs are we do know so much about pigs, that they are so intelligent, that they are so social, which is actually one of the reasons why it is so amazingly cruel to be putting them in these captive states and then implanting them with these devices. So there's no amount of so-called environmental enrichment that could replace the where these pigs probably should be.
Dr. Ann Lamb, I want to keep up with you and check back as we continue to learn more about this. I would greatly appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. I appreciate you coming on the show. I want to turn now to Dr. Neal Barnard, bring him into the discussion here. And Dr. Barnard, ending animal experiments, that's something that we have worked tirelessly on here at the Physicians Committee. Are you able to talk with us a little bit about some of the efforts that we have made already in ending these animal experiments?
Sure. It really starts in many ways with the mindset of the people going into medicine and going into research. And that was one of the things that we've tackled ever since the beginning. I remember when I was a medical student, we were supposed to, as part of our training, take a live dog and experiment on the dog. And the whole idea was, I'll never forget my instructor telling us what we were going to do. He said, make groups of 4 to 6 students. You take the dog, you put the dog on the table, tape the dog down, and then administer a variety of drugs to demonstrate how they affect the cardiovascular reactions. So you are to infuse norepinephrine, and that makes the heart go faster, and you infuse propranolol, and it goes slower, and you write all this down. At the end of the day, you exsanguinate your dog, meaning you bleed the dog to death, and then you can show how the heartbeat changes as the dog slowly dies. And at the end of the afternoon, there are trash bags up and down the hallway, and there are medical students trying to justify what they did as they're having dinner with their girlfriends or their wives or husbands or whatever the case may be. And we realized that if you force students to go through that kind of learning exercise, you're killing 2 things. You're killing the animals, and you're killing a big chunk of compassion in the students. And when I was a medical student, I refused to participate in them. At that time, that was unusual for a medical student to refuse, but I did, and I also swore that we would get rid of those damn labs. And so that was one of our first efforts. And as of 2016, those labs are completely gone. There isn't any medical school in the United States or Canada that offers any sort of animal-based training in the 4 years of medical school. And now we have turned toward residency training. So, for example, pediatric residents were using animals. We were able to eliminate them all. Trauma training involved a lot of animals. We've been able to eliminate that virtually completely. And we're working on the rest. We just had a victory a couple days ago at the University of Virginia, where surgeons were practicing on pigs. And we were preparing to not only a demonstration to them about the better ways to do surgical education, but a public demonstration. And they called us and said, okay, stop. We will get rid of the animals. We won't do it at all. And they have modernized. So anyway, the use of animals in education is gone. Then the use of animals in testing, we've been working long and hard and managed to convince the EPA to call a moratorium on the use of all mammalian testing. They're taking a long time to phase it in, but at least they've made the commitment, which is good. FDA, we are working at to follow suit. And then that leaves the research itself. There is, I'm happy to say now, much more enthusiasm about non-animal methods than there was when we got started 35 years ago, but we have a long way to go. And as Dr. Lamb was describing, there's a lot of cheerleading for sort of the wow of what I can do in a pig. When the pigs, not only are there huge ethical issues about killing animals in this way, but the physiologic differences also get in the way as well.
Yeah, and that just always brings me back to the same question. If there are more humane, human relevant methods of research, why then do people still use animals in these experiments? I'm not sure that there is a good answer.
Well, that was kind of what we were wondering about with the University of Virginia when they contacted us to say, okay, we will not use animals for surgical training anymore. And the reason they gave is they didn't want to have to deal with the hassle of objection from us and objection from the public. And my thought is, wait a minute, your whole reason for using the animals was that you thought nobody would object, but you knew you didn't need to use them at all. You knew it wasn't necessary. Why would you do it? And we see this over and over and over again, where researchers are demonstrating aggression in rats fed alcohol and other things, where you don't need to do these things. Now, Chuck, that doesn't mean that it's always easy to replace animals. There are many situations, for example, in looking at the toxicity of new drugs or the toxicity of, say, the vaccines that are being used or the candidates that are being looked at for COVID-19. You might think, how the heck are you going to show that they're safe? And sometimes animal experiments are offered as one kind of evidence for it. But as we've seen over and over and over again, there are things that look pretty safe in animals that aren't in humans. And that's why every single vaccine candidate ends up being tested, like it or not, in small groups of people, in very small doses, and then gradually increasing as we gain confidence. So the questions here are big ones, but we certainly do know that for humane reasons and also for technical reasons, we want to favor human biology, whether it's human cells or human DNA or human populations or whatever it is. We need to focus on human biology.
And, it's great that we've made some significant advancements here, made some real progress. But as you just said, we still have miles still to travel. So if someone is able to contribute to the Physicians Committee, how does their money then go toward ending these animal experiments and even going so far as to get animals off of dinner plates as well?
Well, thank you for asking that, Chuck. Obviously, we're a nonprofit. Everything we do is funded by our donors. And as you know, I don't take any salary for this work at all. So this is all charitable work, but very effective work, I have to say. Our people work in a couple of ways. Christy Sullivan, who heads up our work on research activities and regulatory testing activities, has a team of people who are sort of half scientists and half diplomats who work with testing companies. They work with government entities, and they work very, very hard with international entities to try to harmonize testing processes that work without animals and that favor human methods. That work has been extremely successful. We also have a whole advocacy department that really gets in and arm wrestles, as we did, for example, when we were able to eliminate the use of chimpanzees in research. That was a tough fight, but we won. And chimpanzees are no longer used in any federally funded research at all, which is just fantastic thing. So anyway, the team has to use their scientific and medical expertise, make the case for the change, and then push hard for it.
And if you're able to contribute to our efforts, we would greatly appreciate it. We need your dollars. Head over to pcrm.org/donate right now. Please give what you can to help end these animal experiments, which, as you've heard today, completely unnecessary. Dr. Barnard, right now, let's go ahead and move on. I want to pivot back to the coronavirus while we still have a few minutes. I know that there have been a number of outbreaks now that have been tied to seafood markets in China. And then here in the States, the outbreaks that have been at these meatpacking plants, they too have been very well documented. But specific to seafood here, I understand that there is now a new study looking at how long the virus can survive on salmon when it is kept at cold temperatures.
You got it. Let me bring up my screen. This was the big issue in China. China obviously was the original outbreak was from bats. And there was a lot of feeling that they had contained the outbreak and they had done a good job. And to this day, the mortality appears to be much, much less in China than in the US. That said, the virus reappeared, and it reappeared in in an animal market, live animal market, also dead animals like fish. And they discovered it was on the cutting boards where salmon was cut up. And so the question was, where did the fish come from? They came from Scandinavia. They came either refrigerated or frozen. And the question was, could it actually survive in the shipping process? So there's a whole new study that came out, and these were Chinese researchers who looked at this. They were at the College of Veterinary Medicine in Guangzhou, China. And what they did is they looked they put the virus in an experimental model on salmon samples. And they first did it at room temperature, 25 degrees centigrade. That's roughly 75, 76 degrees. And that's the red dots here. As you can see at the beginning, the virus is living, but the first week, the second week, the first day, second day, by day 3, it's gone, it's dead, it's gone. The black dots are when you put the virus on it and then you refrigerate it, 4 degrees centigrade. That's, I think, about maybe 40 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. And as you can see, the virus just lives on day 1, day 2, day 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then finally at around day 10, it's going down. Well, if the salmon has the virus and the virus is perfectly viable for 8 or 9 days after you've packed it up and shipped it, that means that the virus is sitting there in the store and it's sitting there on your counter. Now, the idea isn't that you're swallowing the virus in the fish because you're going to cook the fish. The problem is that the meat products here are what we call fomites. They're carrying the virus into your house. It's the equivalent of shaking hands with an infected person. And then you might touch your eyes, touch your skin, and then you can presume, we call this auto-inoculation. So it's the same thing as any kind of poor hygiene. if you're bringing in the frozen or refrigerated meat samples that come from places that are often very, very loaded with the virus, and you're just inviting it into your home ready to contaminate.
And this is really interesting to me. You somewhat have answered this, but I think a critic, though, may be wondering, well, how viable is this really? Because we've heard so often, time and again, that the coronavirus is an airborne virus. So now we're talking about it being on fish. And then critics also can point to cases in New Zealand that were recently investigated, initially thought to have come from maybe a cold food storage facility. But then they said, nah, that's probably not the case. But the threat here still remains. Can you talk about how significant of a threat this is?
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. Let me be clear. The idea isn't that you're swallowing it. It's the same thing as if you are walking out of a bathroom and you're thinking, do I want to grab that door handle or not? The idea isn't necessarily that you're licking the door handle and ingesting the germs immediately. The question is, it's on your hand now. And if it's on your hand, then we get into your car, it's now on your steering wheel or whatever. So you're contaminating things. And if you then touch your face, then the germs can get on your face, into your eye. And that's what we call auto-inoculation. So you're right. People are saying, no, it's not that you necessarily swallow it. That is true for certain other viruses like herpes viruses. For the coronavirus, the idea is that you're inhaling it or auto-inoculating it. So that's the whole reason that people are using hand sanitizer. That's the whole reason people are not shaking hands anymore. But when you bring the salmon or meat products in, if they are contaminated with the virus, then you're inviting it right into your home, and it's very likely still viable.
Excellent advice, Dr. Barnard. Thank you. And time now to turn to nutrition as we enter the home stretch and open up the doctor's mailbag. And this question comes to us from David, who's watching us on YouTube. He asks, is saturated fat found in peanut butter or avocados as bad as the saturated fat that is found in meat and dairy?
Great question. Well, first of all, for people who don't know what we're talking about, saturated fat is often called bad fat. It's bad because it raises cholesterol. It's also associated with Alzheimer's disease and lots of other problems. And you're right to be concerned about meat or dairy. And you're wondering, there is some saturated fat. Frankly, there are traces in lots of foods. There's some in peanuts, some in avocados, some in lots of things. Is that a problem? There are various kinds of saturated fat, but that's really not the issue here. The issue is quantity. So if you take beef fat, about half of it is saturated fat, and the other half of the fat is various kinds of unsaturated fat, all mixed together. If you took chicken fat, it's about 30% saturated fat. If you took cheddar cheese, it's about 65% saturated fat. It's enough to make your arteries snap closed. Okay, so what about peanuts? Peanuts have some fat, and it's a mixture too. About 14% of it is saturated fat, and the other 86% is not. Olive oil is about the same. And for avocados, it's even less, maybe about 9% saturated fat. So there's a lot of fat in an avocado, but only, well, less than 10% of it is saturated fat. So you still want to be careful about the peanuts and the avocados because that fat is a lot of calories. But those are not the fats that are going to tend to raise your cholesterol and not likely to contribute to Alzheimer's because there's so little saturated fat in there.
All right. If we didn't get to your question today, have no fear. Keep on posting it in the comments section or send them to us on Twitter and Instagram using the hashtag ExamRoomLive. I promise you we save each and every one, and we'll do our best to get you an answer on an upcoming episode. And Dr. Barnard, by the way, we may have answered a question. You may have answered a question from a viewer by the name of Darcy a little while back. She writes in the comments section today, a big thank you. She said, just wanted to say a huge thank you to Dr. Barnard. I asked for advice months ago about migraines. Since following his suggestions, I have been migraine-free, so thank you. You have changed my life.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for saying that. You made my day. For anybody who's wondering what we're talking about, we did a research study quite a while ago on migraines, and we brought, by the way, Chuck, forgive me, I know we're over time. Can I give you just 1 minute on this?
By all means.
Migraines are not a tension headache. Migraines are a sledgehammer, and you can't work, you can't function, you can't study when a migraine is active, and they last for hours. So we have done some studies, and step one, if you've got migraines, do a vegan diet, completely no animal products. For some people, dairy is their issue, even non-fat dairy. Get away from it completely. If you still have some migraines, if that didn't cure you, look to see if additional foods might be your triggers. There are some people who might be sensitive to a wide variety of things. It could be onions, it could be wheat, it could be citrus fruits, it could be potato or something like that. So what we do, and we've done this with people in our clinic a number of times, where you do an elimination diet, where you take out all the foods that could contribute to migraines, and there's a list of them, and you eat only the pain-safe foods, let your migraines settle down, and then bring back into the diet, one at a time, all the foods you took out. So you bring back bananas. Wait for 2 days. If you don't get a migraine, bananas are safe. Bring in apples. Wait for 2 days. If you don't get a migraine, apples are safe. And each one, you eat a lot of it to really give it a good test. And this elimination diet helps you identify your triggers. And it is a wonderful, wonderful thing to get migraine free. We use the same thing for rheumatoid arthritis to find the triggers. If you want to see this written up, I wrote a book a number of years ago called The Cheese Trap. And the reason I wrote that is that many people get hooked on cheese, and it too is a very common migraine trigger. And in the back of that book, this method is described in detail. So give it a try. Anyway, thanks for your question. I'm glad that you are now migraine free. That must feel fantastic.
All right. Dr. Barnard, appreciate you taking the time to join us today, my friend.
Thank you, Chuck.
All right. Now, thank you so much for hanging with us today. I know that the subject matter a little bit different than what it is that we ordinarily talk about, but we do greatly appreciate your time being here. And obviously, we still also need your help to end these unnecessary and cruel experiments that are being conducted on animals in labs, and your help to help us get animals off of plates. So please give what you can today by visiting pcrm.org/donate. Every little bit goes to help a long way. And for today, that's going to wrap things up. My thanks to Dr. Ann Lamb for joining us here on the Exam Room Live, and to the crew behind the scenes that makes the magic happen. And to you, my exam roomies, thank you as always for tuning in. On behalf of Dr. Neal Barnard and everyone here at the Physicians Committee, I am the weight loss champion, Chuck Carroll. We will talk to you again tomorrow. And until then, stay safe, take a stand, and keep it plant-based.